Just one spark in the eastern region of Ukraine and the area could explode, is the warning. Russia has moved thousands of its armed forces to the vicinity. The West is telling it to back off. How close are we to seeing a conflict that's been simmering for 7 years escalate? This is Roundtable. And a very warm welcome to you. You are watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. So the question is, what does Russia plan to do next in this part of Eastern Europe? And is the European Union and NATO in any position to halt its ambitions, whatever they are? Since March, Ukrainian and Western officials have raised serious concerns over Russia's military deployment along the border with Ukraine. According to Ukraine's government, in recent weeks, Russia has put 40,000 troops, armored personnel carriers, tanks and artillery near Ukraine's eastern border, and another 40,000 servicemen in annexed Crimea. In the Donbas region of East Ukraine, the army has been in conflict with Russian-backed separatists for the past 7 years, a campaign the Kremlin is accused of orchestrating. Ukraine is not a member of NATO and not protected by treaty, but NATO has close ties with the country.
Russia's considerable military buildup is unjustified, unexplained, and deeply concerning. Russia must end this military buildup in and around Ukraine, stop its provocations, and de-escalate immediately.
Ukraine has also received support from many leaders, including Joe Biden, Angela Merkel, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, leaving Russia more isolated from the West. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's tried to diffuse the tensions by requesting a direct call to Vladimir Putin, but has been ignored. So is Russia preparing to invade Ukraine? Or is Putin playing a different war game? Well, let the conversation begin. On this occasion, we can welcome back to Roundtable all three of our guests. We go to Kiev first of all and say hello to Peter Zalmayev, Director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative. In London, we see Domitila Sagramoso, Lecturer in Security and Development at King's College. And then in Prague, we say hi to Pavel Havlicek, Research Fellow at the Association for International Affairs. Peter, let me come to you first of all, since you are in Kiev. What is the sentiment in the capital, indeed in the whole country, if you can summarize it, about this enormous troops gathering on your eastern border?
Well, obviously the nerves are rattled. It's anything anyone or everyone is talking about, obviously. You know, there was at first an impression that the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky, wasn't taking the threat of Russia's massing on the Ukrainian border seriously. He was traveling to Qatar, he was in Turkey, but I think it was part of a plan to send a message, not of nonchalance, but that, you know, we are not afraid and yet we are prepared. Since subsequent to that, Mr. Zelensky has traveled to the front lines. Ukrainian military officials are on TV and newspapers daily reminding Ukrainians and sending a signal to Russians that this is a different time than 7 years ago in 2014. Ukraine is much, much readier, at least militarily.
But if you're talking about close to 100,000 troops, if you're talking about tanks, if you're talking about the arrival in the next 10 days or so of 10 Russian warships pretty close to the coastline, shouldn't Ukraine be afraid?
Well, it should be afraid, but it should also be confident, because I think by increasing that sort of cost for a Russian invasion, especially a large scale, you essentially lower the odds of it ever happening. The question is, first of all, it's not certain that Russia will invade. And second of all, according to most military estimates, Russia does not have sufficient strength to occupy a significant chunk of Ukrainian territory above what it already has, let alone all of Ukraine. But there's limited, very practical goals that Russia may be considering, and that is that land corridor that we've been talking about for years and years that would connect mainland Russia with the Crimea, which sorely needs fresh water, which Ukraine is obviously blocking, and Russia is at dire straits. If it happens, then Ukraine will be cut off from access to the Azov Sea. So this is, apart from other symbolic meaning that Putin is pursuing with this escalation, this is a very practical goal that Russia may be thinking about.
Pavel, let me come to you. If Ukraine is ready, in what way would it be ready without the help of others?
I think this is half of the story, because Ukraine has many friends, including from the European Union, including from the United States and and NATO. So I think, and we are much better prepared, as Peter has mentioned, than in 2014, because obviously everybody understands what this now means, and what Russia is actually capable of doing. So I think we are very much ready. We have seen the statements coming from the United States and the new administration of Joe Biden. We have seen the statements from the EU diplomacy, from the EU member states, and most recently also gathering in Brussels, including from NATO, and Jens Stoltenberg expressing very clearly that the alliance is with Ukraine, that the EU is with Ukraine, and together with the United States, we will do everything possible to prevent this intervention.
Okay, but Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and however friendly NATO may seem to it, it is not obliged to defend Ukraine because Ukraine is not a member country. What would Ukraine expect from NATO?
That's a very good question. I think that was also expressed during the recent meeting in Brussels, where Mr. Kuleba, the Ukraine foreign minister, actually traveled, and he met with the foreign ministers of the whole of the Alliance 30. So he expressed his interest in basically stepping up the Western support, to go beyond the words. That was a very clear expression from the Ukrainian side, that we really appreciate all the declarations, but we also need concrete deeds, which would be in providing military support, training, capacity building, and essentially also what the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky has said, that Ukraine wants to get to NATO. That's a clear goal, and the alliance has pledged that since 2008.
Okay, Domitilla, let's hear from Angela Merkel, since we're talking about fine words at the moment. The German Chancellor just a few weeks ago, and then I've got a question for you.
Germany is one of Ukraine's closest partners, and we are staunch supporters of Ukraine's territorial integrity. It was and it is important to us that the European Union react to the annexation of Crimea 7 years ago and to the conflict in eastern Ukraine resolutely and unequivocally, and that the EU stick to its position despite all skeptics, and that it does everything for this situation to change.
So there we have Angela Merkel, Domitilla, talking about unequivocally and resolutely defending the rights of the Ukraine and the Crimea, as we did 7 years ago. Well, the EU didn't defend those rights 7 years ago. So what is the reason for expecting it to do so now?
Well, I think this is all part of the effort by Ukraine to raise the Crimean issue through the Crimean platform. So it is sort of a backing to that initiative, which from what I understand, and I may be wrong, it doesn't really involve the use of force. It involves a variety of instruments, legal, economic, and humanitarian, intended to sort of ensure that there is a process whereby Crimea could be returned to Ukraine. And I think that it makes sense absolutely for Europeans to support this platform if it is not seen as sort of as creating additional instability and potentially violence. So it was clear in 2014 that the annexation of Crimea came as a great surprise to many in Europe and in the United States. So it was very difficult at that time to decide what to do militarily. I think that it's good to raise the question of Crimea because it has been a bit forgotten, and a lot of the focus has been on the Donbass. And to me, it makes sense. Of course, I don't expect that Europeans are now going to provide sort of military support for the liberation of Crimea, and I don't think the Ukrainians are interested in carrying out any kind of military operation in Crimea. But I think it is all part and parcel of an effort not to forget about Crimea and to raise the issue and to find a path whereby something can be done about, returning in some way Crimea to Ukraine, which is very difficult undertaking. I'm not saying this is an easy path, but I think it is good to raise the question.
Okay, Peter, let me come back to you, and if we can try and look at this from Russia's point of view, do you think Vladimir Putin is engaged in a game of bluff, or is he serious? And if he is serious, why would he want to do this?
Well, I mean, you would be forgiven to thinking that back in 2014, right, during and after the Sochi Winter Olympics, and it turned out he wasn't bluffing. So you can never take anything for granted with Vladimir Putin. At the same time, the way he's acting is he always tries to defeat expectations. We're probably looking at some combination of the worst case and not so bad case scenarios. Like I said, a full-scale invasion is simply not feasible for many reasons, including very practically speaking, military might, which is not sufficient to defend, to take and control such a huge landmass, Ukraine, where the population, mind you, is not very friendly towards Russia. Before the Crimea, you could argue that Ukrainians were more or less friendly to Russians, but Putin is himself, I think, can be credited with serving the cause of Ukrainian identity, of a flowering of Ukrainian identity that we have seen over the last 7 years. So I think what Putin is really after is more concessions from the Ukrainians, and the one big concession through which he tries to and he hopes to control Ukraine politically is to force Ukraine to accept the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics on the basis of autonomies, because Putin does not want them. They are not profitable. They are a big drag on the budget, so that they could control Ukraine foreign policy. They could block Ukraine from moving ever towards Europe and from contemplating memberships of the EU or of NATO. And that is the one sticking point that is Ukraine will not agree to, and that's why we are where we are, with no peace in sight.
Pavel, let me come to you, and Donatella, this is also for you. How significant is it, the report we've had, it hasn't been confirmed yet, that the US has pulled out of sending warships to the Black Sea after Russia said, stay away for your own good?
Well, the official commentary from the US side was that they never actually said and confirmed that they would be going that way. So there is a game of words, let's say, who said what, who actually confirmed what, and so on. So I don't consider that to be really significant. What I think is much more important is really the kind of assurances that the United States gave to Ukraine, and also when they reach out to Kremlin, to Moscow as well, and basically had a conversation, most recently also from the side of the US president, when he spoke with Vladimir Putin. And, on one hand, he actually said that, there is we want to prevent any kind of escalation, but at the same time that we are ready to get engaged, if necessary. And one last point on this one, actually, just have a look at the most recent U.S. sanctions against Russia. These are coming just from today. More than 30 entities, prevention from of U.S. institutions to buy Russian debt and the like. So we see that really the United States are back. They are back in the world politics, world game, and they are ready to play hard, I would feel.
Okay, we'll talk about sanctions in a minute, and the question will be, is Russia at all worried about sanctions? I think it is to some extent, but I'll get your opinion on that. But Pavel, is there any kind of concerted idea of what will happen on the Western side if Russia does invade?
Well, that is my actually question, because I wanted to see more of concrete deeds and actually more of concrete plans articulated during the recent meeting in Brussels that I referred to when Mr. Kuleba actually traveled to Brussels to NATO headquarters and had a meeting, but actually none of the concrete plans were really articulated. Probably they were spoken out and spelled out during the closed roundtable discussion, but it was not really articulated publicly, which would be one way to actually assure the European public and the world public that the West actually is ready to engage with much more than words. I already spoke about what the Ukrainians would like from us to see, the end perspective, in NATO, but also very concrete steps, military-wise and so on. But they were not articulated in public, probably only behind the closed doors.
That one to you, Domitilla. In concrete terms, what would Ukraine hope that the West would actually do if Russia invaded? What kind of physical support would it expect?
I think there is an ideal scenario and a more realistic scenario. Of course, Ukraine has been begging for membership recently. The president made it very clear, NATO membership. So that would be the ideal scenario that, in some way would not only potentially deter a Russian attack, but also guarantee some form of military support. But I think that is not going to happen now. What Ukraine can expect is support to maybe not necessarily deter the attack, but if the attack occurs, to somehow help with a defense, with defensive positions, and make the Russian presence in Ukraine very hard. So help with.
But no Western troops going in. Confronting Russian armed forces?
I don't think we can expect any NATO troops there unless countries individually decide that they want to send them, but not as a NATO effort. But I certainly could imagine that if there is the kind of operation that some of us fear could happen of a sort of a Russian invasion in the south or in the area of Donetsk and Lugansk, I think we can expect that the West is going to become fully engaged in providing at least equipment support, any kind of intelligence, maybe additional sort of aerial reconnaissance, so information intelligence and weaponry that could help the Ukrainians very significantly. Also, what I think that if there is
sorry to interrupt. Time is of the essence. I do apologize for interrupting. I want to drop in a little bit of Sergei Lavrov here, the Russian foreign minister.
We recommend to all the responsible countries, including Turkey, to analyse the situation thoroughly, to analyse the everlasting militaristic proclamations of the regime in Kiev, and warn them against fueling belligerent statements in Ukraine.
Peter, let me ask you in response to what we heard there from Lavrov. It doesn't seem like they're bluffing, or perhaps it is the biggest bluff of all, that they are shouting louder and louder.
Well, this brings to mind that infamous Gleiwitz provocation, if you remember, the situation in 1939 when the Germans, the Nazi Germany, accused the Poles of attacking a German language radio station in a Polish town, and they used that as a pretext to invade Poland the very next day. This is what we're seeing happening in the Donbass, where the Russians are claiming there was a drone attack as a result of which a child died. Patrushev, one of the close confidants of Vladimir Putin, is said to have traveled to Putin recently, and we only can surmise that they're concocting all sorts of claims and provocations in order to justify this invasion, if it happens, and if it happens either on a large scale, but more likely in a limited fashion. Obviously, they will have to sell it to their own public as a defensive sort of measure against a belligerent and very, very dangerous and Russophobic Ukraine.
Yeah, Domitilla, I'm sorry I interrupted you. I just wanted to get that bit in there, and I'm going to come back to you and say, do you think it is likely we will see the kind of action that we've just heard about there from Peter, with Russia saying, listen, we know what's happening there, we're going to go in, it's a defensive measure, when in fact it is anything but, that it will invade?
I think I was very worried, to be honest, and I really thought Russia was really going for this sort of attack of building a land bridge between, the southern parts of Donetsk and Crimea, and potentially there were talks also of Russians even landing in the areas around Odessa. Now I'm starting to be a bit more skeptical. I think that the Russians wanted to send a very clear message to the Ukrainians that they were going to intervene if there was some kind of attempt to take the regions by force. I don't have any evidence that proves that the Ukrainians were trying to do that, but that's what the Russians are saying. So, and there are some videos that I've seen of Ukrainian troops moving. I don't know if it is in the direction of the Donbass. I mean, that's what the Russians are saying. And I think that if one considers that element, a lot of the Russian behavior starts making a lot more sense. As Dmitry Trenin clearly highlighted, a lot of this was really to send a message to everyone that no violence should be carried out in the areas of the Donbass. They were very worried in Russia that, the Ukrainians could replicate the Azerbaijani scenario. Apparently, the Turks were providing, support with unmanned aerial vehicles. Now, this is all evidence that I have not been able to verify, but that's what the Russians
not evidence as such. It's just a suggestion at the moment, correct?
It's a suggestion, but there is some videos that I have seen that I would like to now see if I can verify. If this is correct, and again, it's a big if, then it could explain why the Russians have been deciding to send, all this weaponry and mobilization to show that, to send a very clear message to the Ukrainians. Okay. To me, it's the only reasoning that is makes sense, because if they really wanted to carry out an attack, then they wouldn't have been doing it in the way they are. But again,
if you can get that verified, Domitila, do come back and share it with us first of all here on Roundtable before you share it with anybody else. We would appreciate that. Pavel, let me come to you. Britain and the United States say the situation has reached crisis point. Do you deter Russians' intentions, whatever they happen to be, by slapping even more sanctions on that country, or do you do what?
I believe that this is actually the most powerful tool that the West actually has at its disposal, available at this stage, because actually we know that Russia is still largely dependent on exports of its energy to the West. It is also financially still connected to the West, and so on and so forth. That is why also Russia was so insistent on finishing the Nord Stream 2 project, and so on. So we actually have a certain leverage, and the EU, United States, and the UK actually, in concerted effort, they can really impose a certain harms. There were already talks about excluding Russia from SWIFT banking operations, from the system. There are also other means that the West has actually at its disposal. So I think this is actually the most painful thing that the West can be doing in response. When this is also obviously another part of the story. One is to support and assure Ukraine of the Western support, but the other one is reaching directly to Moscow and actually putting some tokens on the table. And I think this was quite well understood. Maybe if I can just add to what was already mentioned, I'm also interpreting the whole Russian escalation actually from the point of view of the Russian domestic context. We know that Russia has elections in September, and that they are trying to escalate, traditionally to increase the legitimacy of the Putin's regime, which is really threatened. This is, the ruling party of United Russia has its support way below the 30%, and obviously there are strong concerns related to Navalny and the domestic uprising.
Pavel, thank you very much. I want to go back to Peter for one thing that you mentioned at the beginning, the lack of fresh water in Crimea. A, how serious is the situation? And B, is going into Ukraine, turning the taps back on, the only way that Russia could get water to the people in Crimea? Could they not bring it in by ship? I know it's an awful lot of water, but are there no other ways?
Well, obviously, it's they've managed so far, but this year they're predicting in a couple of months. I think the water will be. It will be finished, and this is just apart from a nuisance of having to bring the water across the bridge by barges. It's also kind of a slap in the face of Putin. He also is using it, like I said, as an excuse to escalate. I think it's doable to do it without Ukraine, but it's very inconvenient, and once again, it's a very convenient excuse for the likes of Mr. Sergei Lavrov to go and talk about the belligerence of Ukrainians and how they're gung-ho against Russia. So I think it's a combination of the two.
I was talking to somebody on this program the other day about Russia in the Arctic, and they said, well, look, if something happens in Ukraine or in that particular region, that could be a domino effect. It could cause problems in the Arctic. And you mentioned water there, and so many times people have said the next world war will be about water. Without being alarmist, this is a particularly serious situation, isn't it?
It is a serious situation, and like you said, it has the context is actually global. You know, this is just probably the very beginning of resource-based wars that we will be seeing more and more. If you look elsewhere in the former Soviet Union, Central Asia, a big hotspot could be developing between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan over a water dam that Tajikistan is trying to build, and Uzbekistan is very much against. So we will be seeing more and more of these crop up, unfortunately, in the years to come.
We will keep a very close eye on it with your help, I hope. Thank you very much indeed to each and every one of you for coming on. Very worrying situation indeed. But wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable, we thank you very much indeed for the time you have spent with us, and we hope that you will return. But for now, from me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, it's goodbye.